All right, everybody, this is Sheets, and I'm going to be going over the main slate for baseball today. Bobby's away in Arizona, taking the day off, or the weekend off, and so I'm going to take over today, and boy, did he leave me with a rough one. This is an extremely difficult slate, and in my business, in the hedge fund trading world, there's a phrase that goes around that people, throw around kind of willy-nilly, saying that some particular market conditions call for what's called a stock pickers market. Stock pickers market, meaning that there's no real direction of which way the market's going to go. So it really rewards people for being able to identify individual stocks rather than being able to just go with the flow, so to speak. And while it's not exactly the same thing, I feel as though this Major League Baseball slate is kind of like a player's pickers market. What I mean is that the pitching is so strong relative to the hitting that it becomes extremely difficult to just stack teams. There's very, very few spots where you can identify a weak pitcher that you can just attack. There's maybe only one or two spots, and the way DFS works, those are going to be the most popular. So it's extremely difficult, today's slate. And what I'm going to probably end up doing is something I don't do too often, which is not really play five-man stacks. I'm going to just try to do my best to kind of pick good plays and good two-man and three-man stacks to, still take advantage of the correlation inherent in baseball DFS. But boy, the pitching is so strong, kind of up and down the board, that to take a stand, even a diversified stance on teams being able to really light these guys up is very, very difficult today. So I am anticipating kind of a, I don't want to say lower score, but let's just say that I don't expect offenses to really just, rock the house. All right. So I'm going to go game by game. It's a very small slate, 6 games, but it does involve a little bit of, how we shall say, finesse, I suppose. So we're going to start with DraftKings, and we are going to do a little bit of FanDuel also, and I'm going to be kind of going back and forth between this. But so the first game, Tampa, Washington, and the only thing that's good about this first game, well, one of the things is that Charlie Morton might be a really good play on another day. But the uncertainty with his pitch count just kind of makes him just isn't going to make it for me today. There's just too many other decent options. With respect to Max Scherzer, he is rating to be the top play on the slate, both on DraftKings too, FanDuel and DraftKings for me. Let me just double check. Yeah, both on DraftKings and on FanDuel, and ownership is kind of reflecting that as well. So yes, he certainly is the best play, but there are other plays that you can make that can save you some money. I might end up using him. It depends on how else my lineups kind of shake out. He certainly does rate to be the top play. And just your lineup construction is going to determine whether you use him or not. I imagine he's about 35 to 40% owned, which probably makes sense. I will caution you that Tampa isn't exactly the weakest team nowadays. I mean, with Meadows back, and they are a pretty good, decent hitting team, and Scherzer has not flashed that type of ceiling that he has over the last couple of years. But again, this is kind of like a long-term form versus short-term form thing, and he does rate to be the best play, but he's certainly scary, just because there's just so many other options that you can go to replace his points if you don't want to pay for this. So let's see what happens. Now, if you did want to play some Tampa, okay, I'm just going to go team by team here with the hitting. I don't really, the one guy I have on the Washington side, that rates to be a really strong play, if he does in fact crack the lineup, is going to be Victor Robles. So it's not exactly you know, Ruth and Gehrig here. But Robles at 2,100 is kind of is just an overall just a really, really strong value. Now again, the problem is, I mean, so many of these other Washington guys are so expensive that I can't even get to a two-man with Washington. You would think that I'd maybe try Soto if he gets in, but he's 5,800. So none of these Washington guys are going to make it for me. Now, if you want, it is a short slate. If you want to play some leverage, you can play some Tampa guys here, right? So again, this depends on who kind of cracks the lineup. But if Kevin Kiermaier actually gets in at 2K, I mean, that's really, really strong. I mean, you might even be able to, on a slate like this, get away with playing Scherzer and Kiermaier together. He does have power, and at 2K, you're not really costing yourself much if he gets nothing. So he's certainly someone you could use. Austin Meadows, whom I alluded to before, is also a really, really strong leverage play against all the Scherzer ownership. So he's another one you can use. And also G-Man Choi, who basically ruined Garrett Cole's life a few days ago, is another one you could play. So if you wanted to, you could go do a little three-man with Kiermaier, Choi, and Meadows, for example, and get some extreme leverage on Scherzer and just hope that he's just not quite the same. Or, he could also get some strikeouts and give up some home runs also. So it is certainly viable. And again, as I said, today is one of those days where, you're going to be hunting for hitting plays. On FanDuel, before I kind of go over, let me just double check and make sure. Even more so on FanDuel, this is not necessarily going to be my lineup, but if you don't want to play Scherzer, again, Meadows and Choi rate to be like extremely strong values. So just kind of keep that in mind. Going on to the next game, Kansas City and Cleveland. Here we get to one of the spots that people are going to be playing from the hitting side. That's going to be the Cleveland hitters. But let's deal with the pitching first, because you're going to have a pitcher here on the Cleveland side that's going to garner a lot of ownership, and for good reason. Like Zach Plesac is, he's only 7,600. He has incredible upside from here, and even just game log watching. I mean, he had that COVID scare, came back off of a month layoff pretty much, and popped with 6 strikeouts against the same team, right? So he's going to get a lot of ownership. I'm a little worried about the ownership he's going to get, actually. And the way I like to look at, rematches between pitchers and hitters, I don't expect it to go the same way twice in a row. So, yes, Plesac does look to be a very, very strong play here. But if his ownership starts to get a little bit too high, you might want to end up fading that a little bit. Now, if you do want to fade that, for example, and then we'll get back to Cleveland for a second, look at FanDuel first. Again, I don't want to go back and forth between, it's what I'm looking for, screens. But if you did want to get a little leverage on what's going to be some pretty heavy Plesac ownership, you can play Ryan O'Hearn if he gets in the lineup on FanDuel at 2,300. That's certainly possible. And on DraftKings, you can actually, again, if he makes the lineup, you can get to Alex Gordon, who is really, really cheap. He's 2,500. So those are a couple of things you can do to kind of fade what could be some pretty chalky, and probably for decent reason, mid-range pitcher. So on the Cleveland side, on both DraftKings and FanDuel, you're going to get a decent amount of ownership. There's another team that's going to, is going to get more of it, maybe. But Cleveland has a good combination of value and upside and raw points, which is going to make these guys really good plays. So I think Franmil Reyes is going to be the strongest play. He's going to probably garner the most ownership also. But all these guys look really, really good on DraftKings. So Carlos Santana, first base, 3,700, looks like a really strong play. Jose Ramirez, he might be in this lineup, looks like a really strong play. So who else? You can go to Naquin, Cesar Hernandez. This is one of the closest things you can get to a stack on this slate. And it's a good stack because it's not only, it's not only good, but it's also somewhat affordable as opposed to San Diego, which we'll get to later, which is like really, really expensive. So I do think Cleveland is going to end up getting the majority. Maybe we'll talk about Toronto in a minute, but I think Cleveland's going to get the majority of the ownership. And I just don't like playing, chalky hitting. I just don't like doing it. Now, I will say that if you did want to play chalky hitting like Cleveland, you certainly don't want to pair it with the chalkier pitchers. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So that was on DraftKings. On FanDuel, again, I don't want to go back and forth, but just to kind of hit on this, let me just go back to my screen over here. Yeah, same thing. Jose Ramirez looks to be a really strong play. Lindor is a little bit better over there. Reyes as well, Cesar Hernandez. So that does rate to be a pretty good stacking spot on FanDuel also. But again, you're going to get the ownership that comes with it. So again, when you're building GPP lineups, make sure that you don't just go chalk. Make sure that you don't play like Scherzer with Cleveland, right? You want to go other pitchers, you could do it, but we'll talk about that. Okay. Yankees, Toronto. So the pitchers here are going to be Ryu and Montgomery. And so here's the case I'm going to make. The way that I have my draft, this is just me, all right? My DraftKings pitchers kind of order or whatever. Is this FanDuel or DraftKings I'm looking at? So I have Scherzer as the best, and then we'll get down to Lamet in a minute. But I do have Gausman as a good play. I'm saying this all for a reason. Sorry about this. But I do have Hyun-Jin Ryu just kind of below that Plesac level. Like I have him almost the same as Plesac and almost the same as Zach Gallen. Not quite as good, but just on the cusp. So one thing you can do if you want to get a little bit of leverage and be a little different is you could play Ryu. And yeah, you're giving up some, projection leverage, not projection leverage, some projection, stability, I guess is the best way I'm looking for it. But he certainly is going to come in at a fraction of the ownership as some of those other guys like Plesac and maybe even Gallen also. So I think that he could actually be a pretty sneaky a pivot with a pretty watered down Yankees lineup. And likewise, on the other side of the equation, Jordan Montgomery, certainly not the greatest of all time, but as I just alluded to, Kevin Gausman is going to rate to be incredibly high owned, I think, as he should be at 6,100. But, if you want a price pivot, you could try Jordan Montgomery here. And again, this is if you want to play some of those chalkier hitting stacks like Cleveland or San Diego, which we'll get to a little bit later. So I do like both of those pitchers kind of in a short slate just for the leverage it provides on some of these chalkier ideas. Okay. Okay, so as far as the hitting goes, I'm just don't know if I'm going to get to too much of this on DraftKings. The one guy I do like on DraftKings from this game is going to be on the New York side. I was anticipating that Toronto was going to be kind of popular, but I mean, I'm not getting to them. I'm not getting to Grichuk and Guerrero and Gurriel, which I think is going to get some ownership here. So that's, I guess, one way I can differ is not take Toronto. Just the way my numbers are reading, I'm not a bit, I just don't get to them as much. So I'm going to be way under on the Toronto guys, as the kids like to say. But with the Yankees, the one guy I do like is Aaron Hicks. I think he is a very, very strong play on DraftKings at 3,700. Let me look at FanDuel real quick. On the other side, where is my FanDuel? Okay. FanDuel, you could get a little more Yankees. So on FanDuel, you can get Gleyber Torres at 2,700 at shortstop, and you could also get Gary Sanchez if they let him back in the lineup. Toronto is a little bit better over there. You could play Vlad Guerrero at 3,100 or Villar. Those are both really, really strong plays. Strong plays, very strong plays. I mean, that's up to, they're strong. Gurriel's not bad also. So like for me, I mean, I just only used, I think, Hicks and Torres for this game. I think those are the strongest plays on FanDuel from this game. Okay, so I guess that's pretty much it. I do think this game could be kind of sneaky to get a little bit of leverage on some of the chalkier spots. Speaking of which, you get to what could be a really chalky game here with Gausman and Gallen pitching. Like Gausman at 6,100 is just extraordinarily cheap. So he's going to garner a great amount of ownership, specifically from those, entries that want to get to some of these San Diego bats. So, yes, it does rate to be a very strong play. As a matter of fact, let me just double check what I had. With respect to DraftKings, I did have Gausman being the second best, probably the second best play behind Scherzer, a little bit better than Lamet, given, even given price and stuff like that. But he's going to be owned, Gausman. He's going to be 25%. I just don't think I'm going to get to him. I might. He's definitely the second strongest play. It just depends on where else I go from the hitting. But as you've seen, I haven't really liked too much of the hitting here. So we'll see what happens. And Zach Gallen on the other side, he's fine. I see his ownership is projected about 30% or so. And then I would prefer Plesac if I had to choose between Gallen and Plesac. And I think I would actually go with Ryu again. Just for an ownership play, like half the ownership. I think I would prefer him to Gallen. But again, that's just ownership driven. It's I think head to head, probably Gallen's a better play. But you factor ownership in. I do think that Ryu could be decent here. Let me look at the hitting. Well, first let me look at FanDuel again. So FanDuel pitching. Again, you don't really need to pay down for pitching at FanDuel. So, but I will say that Gausman, if you wanted to do that, he's pretty close to Lamet when it comes to not raw points, but on point per dollar and stuff like that. And given that could be a really different way to go, actually, because I do think that Scherzer is going to get as they say, shit ton of ownership on FanDuel. So it's possible that maybe you play Gausman with FanDuel. That's I don't think that many people are going to do that. So with respect to hitting, though, let me just take a look real quick. There are a couple of plays that you could. Now this is I think really interesting. I think that you can play some Arizona guys here once again as a decent amount of leverage off of Gausman. So, like for example, I'll read them off. David Peralta, 2,900 on DraftKings is a little bit is very tempting. As is Cole Calhoun, and I don't know if Dalton Varsho is going to get in there, but he's a flat 2K. So, and then Ketel Marte is always good. So Arizona could be somewhat sneaky. FanDuel, Ketel Marte could be fine. They're not quite as good on FanDuel as the Arizona guys are on DraftKings. But then, once again, Escobar, Calhoun look okay. But it's not the same thing because you're not getting as much Gausman leverage on FanDuel because he's not going to be as owned as he might be on DraftKings. So I do recommend that. I do recommend to take some shots with Arizona guys. That could be a decent little 3 or 4 man. Maybe not so much 4 man, but little 3 man to get some leverage on Gausman, who could blow up. It's very possible. No real interest in San Francisco hitters. All right, 2 more to go. Colorado, San Diego. So this is interesting because when you first eyeball it, you say, okay, where can I find hitting, like good hitting against kind of shaky pitching? And at first glance, you say, okay, San Diego looks like really easy because Kyle Freeland's probably one of the worst of the pitchers here. And San Diego, you can get all this power and all this stuff. But first of all, I will say that Freeland is not that bad. Okay, now again, you can game log watch and just call me an idiot, but he's got negative points his last 2 games. But before that, he had 15 fantasy points against the Dodgers, against the Astros. And I will say that at home at Colorado against San Diego. I mean, he held them down, man. I mean, so if San Diego became too popular, I'm not. I don't need to go to them. As a matter of fact, I mean, like these guys are really expensive, aren't they? I mean, none of these guys are popping for me as good values here. I mean, what are you really going to pay $5,700 for Machado, for example? I don't know, man. It's possible, but I'm just not going to do it. I just feel I'd rather pay up for the pitching, and not pay up for these San Diego guys. I mean, I look down my list of values here on FanDuel, for example. I mean, it takes me a while before I get to even anybody I really want to play from them. So I don't know. Tatis, I imagine, is the top play just because he's like 4 home run upside every single game. Now, I mentioned pitching. Danielson Lamet, he is rating to be one of the top pitchers on the slate. He's got good strikeout upside. He's going to be owned. And I regard him as very similar to like Gallen, Plesac, guys like that with respect to their values here. So, you could mix and match him with Plesac and Gallen. You're going to pay for it with the ownership. But again, just make sure you don't take too many chalky hitters along with them, and you should be okay. On FanDuel, let me just see if on FanDuel he looks the same. Yeah, he's the second best option on FanDuel. Pretty close though with Gausman, as I was saying before. I think Scherzer's the best, but Lamet's not like. I mean, if Lamet becomes too chalky, I don't know, man. I don't know if I would go to him on FanDuel necessarily. Colorado hitters, I'm not getting to, I think, on either site. Let me just double check. Yeah, I'm definitely not getting to them on FanDuel. And on DraftKings, I mean, the first guy I get to is like Ramil Tapia. You know what I mean? I'm just really not a big fan of the Colorado side of this. Okay, so last game of the day, Houston, Oakland. The pitching, there are some slates where these guys would be in play, but not for me, not for today. I just think all those other pitchers that I mentioned are just so much far superior. Although I will say that given price, if you want to do it, Montas on FanDuel is really cheap. Okay, he's only $6,300. So if you did feel the need to pay up for all this hitting on FanDuel, he is only $6,300. But I'm not going to do it. I'm just saying. And on DraftKings, Montas, not quite. I mean, neither of these guys just quite get there. I mean, to give you an example, I think Freeland's a better play than Montas against San Diego. And that's one thing you do. You really want leverage? Take Freeland. Because everybody's going to play San Diego and Gausman. You could just play Freeland and get double leverage against them. But when you're playing Freeland, you're not playing him to get like a zillion strikeouts anyway. So it's not as if it's like completely direct leverage. So now with respect to the hitting, I did find some interesting hitting options from both sides, I think. So on DraftKings, there are 3, and they're not going to be too earth-shattering. In other words, everybody's going to know about these. But Aldemez Diaz at only 2K is going to be, I would presume, really popular. He's a really, really strong play. Presuming he gets in the lineup, obviously. I mean, 2K for him. George Springer, who you see here in my dummy lineup here, he's going to be a strong play. Michael Brantley. But again, it's not like a real stack situation. Well, maybe this is the closest thing you can come up with. But if you play Springer, Brantley, Diaz together, all 3, I think that's plenty. And then let me just check on the Oakland. Let me check on FanDuel actually before I come back to. Yeah, I'm not as big of a fan of the Houston side on FanDuel. But Oakland on FanDuel is really strong. So let's start with that. So Oakland, their hitters are pretty good. So I have Olsen as a really strong play. I have Kanha as a really strong play over there. I have Ramon Laureano. He's not on this lineup, but he's a pretty strong player over there. So I think Oakland's a very interesting way to go, actually, on FanDuel. Again, a little 3-man, not a big deal. Okay. This one's really interesting. So I had, by the way, I forgot to mention Josh Naylor from Cleveland. Really, really cheap over on FanDuel. So you see a lineup like this where I have both Olsen and Kanha. Maybe I'll try to, make it a point to get Laureano in. So, instead of playing, say, Reyes or Hicks or something like that, a really chalky Reyes, maybe I will go to Laureano just to get a little more correlation there. But I don't know. You know what I mean? This is what's difficult about this slate, is it's really tough to make stacks because you're giving up. You know what I mean? Because your pitchers you're targeting are not that bad. Okay, so on DraftKings, let's see if I like the Oakland guys on DraftKings a little bit. Not really. They're not as strong on DraftKings there, for me at least, on FanDuel. So, but on FanDuel, you could certainly. I mean, I think Oakland's pretty strong team to attack. So where are we? So where are we with the slate? We have some really, really good pitching, and no must-have pitching. You have some decent hitting, but in my opinion, no must-have hitting. So I think what you really need to do, like I said, is turn this into like a stock picker's market and just pick your favorite plays. And then what you do is when you pick your favorite plays, obviously you don't want to play in a GPP like one guy from 7 teams, right? 6 different teams. So then you make a little bit of concessions along the way and make up little 2-mans or make up little 3-mans or something like that. But for me, this is just me. I don't think that a 5-man stack wins this on DraftKings today. I don't think that a 4x4 wins this on FanDuel today. I think it's just, whoever picks the best one-offs and the best 2-mans and the best 3-mans are just going to win, just because the pitching is that strong. I guess that's all I had. Good luck today, and I will come back with an NBA video rather shortly.